welcome. My name is NOVARIS, and today I would like to speak to you about the Magicka Nightblade build for the Clockwork City patch. There are some noticeable differences between this character sheet and previous character sheets. If you've watched my other videos, you'll notice that the health is slightly too low for trials. There are other issues with this build, and I will go over that in a basics section of the video. So firstly, I'll be going over the DPS Parses. I'll then go over the basics. I'll go over gear setup, skill points, champion point layout, and then finally rotation. So this section of the build video will be relatively short, but it's just to explain a couple things about the build that you might be curious about. So the health is slightly lower here. It's actually just because you don't do any heavy attacks as a Magicka Nightblade when you're doing a DPS test, or as few as possible. This means that we need quite high Magicka recovery. So we get most of that Magicka recovery from vampirism, from Witch Mother's Potent Brew, and then there's a skill here as well called Siphoning Strikes. I'll go over that a bit more later on, but all of those in combination mean that we don't need to heavy attack at all. Although using Witch Mother's Potent Brew without any health glyphs or health set bonuses means that we're going to have 15k health, and that's not survivable in trials. At least it's going to be a challenge. So what you could do is put a health glyph on one of your illambris pieces, or you could use a set like Vulcan Scoria as well. That'd be another option. Okay, so one of the reasons I wanted to go over in basics the gear was because mechanical acuity at the moment it seems to be very powerful in short DPS tests. In longer fights it seems to be a lot weaker. I suspect that at the start of the fight it's because it has a 15% chance to proc with damage, So I believe that because you're using this Destruction Staff ultimate, most of that ultimate is going to be empowered. You're going to have 100% crit chance during that ultimate. Also, at the very end of the fight, when you're using your execute, you get, for 6 seconds I believe, you get stronger attacks again as well. So if you use that and then you're using your Impale, one of the strongest executes in the game, then you're going to be hitting for quite high DPS numbers. And in a shorter fight, that's going to take up a larger portion of the fight. So it's not really representative of what Magicka Nightblade does in trials. But in trial situations, Magicka Nightblade outperforms every other Magicka class in single target DPS. At least that's currently the case. So I will go over every other aspect of this build in the other sections of the video. On the front bar, I am using the Asylum's Perfected Inferno Staff with an infused trait and a shock damage enchantment. On the back bar, I'm using the Maelstrom's Lightning Staff with an infused trait and a beserker enchantment. You could swap this out. Other DPS tests with similar results are using a precise or a Nirnhoned weapon with a poison, damage health poison, so that would be dealing damage for 4.5 seconds and then 6.4 seconds. I'm using 2 pieces of illambris, one heavy, one medium. If you don't have one heavy or one medium, then the other set is craftable, so you can choose which weight you're missing. But you should have a 5-1-1 setup for this. So 5 mechanical acuity, and then 3 pieces of willpower. So in a trial situation, if you are going to have very short fights, then mechanical acuity may be better. If one of the bosses is shielded up, for example, it could be quite powerful in Asylum Sanctorium. I'm not entirely sure, and it is still being tested. The health isn't quite enough, so you could add a health glyph to your illambris piece, or you could use a set called Valkanscoria instead. Okay, and finally as well, if you don't have the Perfected Inferno Staff, what you could do is run a Moondancer staff if you've got 3 pieces Moondancer Jewelrey. You could also run Master Architect staff if you've got 3 pieces Master Architect. That would probably outperform, but if you've got 3 pieces Willpower, I seem to be getting more decent results with 3 pieces Willpower in comparison to 3 pieces Master Architect or 3 pieces Moondancer. So on the front bar I'm running Crippling Grasp. There's multiple reasons for having this skill here. It's a high single target damage dot, and it's also a siphoning ability, which means that we get some extra max magicka just from having it slotted there. What we could do is, if we prefer to have Crippling Grasp on the back bar instead of siphoning attacks, we could swap both of them around. Since they are both siphoning abilities, we will get the Magicka Flood passive active. You might be wondering why I'm saying you would want to swap those round. The main reason is, if you have Crippling Grasp on your back bar, if it's the last skill that you use as your bar swapping, it retains the trait, so it gets the bonus from the trait that you were using that staff on when you casted it. So it's precise or Nirnhoned staff, you would want to have that on back bar. An infused staff, it doesn't really matter because we've got dual infused here. Next skill is Merciless Resolve. It's an assassination ability, which means we also get some extra bonuses here. We get extra critical damage. We also get more critical just built in because of it. We also get the minor berserk bonus, giving us 8% more damage. And also, if we do 5 light attacks, it's a very strong single target damage attack. We get 2 of those before we have to refresh the ability. The next skill I'm using is Force Pulse. This skill is only really worth using if you have the Perfected Inferno staff, because if you have the regular or unperfected staff, 3 casts of that ability means you'll be doing less DPS than if you had 4 Moondancer or 4 Infallible Ether instead. If you use 4 Moondancer or 4 Infallible, then this would be a DPS loss, having Force Pulse, so what you could use instead is Swallow Soul or the other morph. Both of them are very cheap abilities and very strong abilities as well. The next skill is Impale. This is one of the strongest abilities that a Nightblade has. You might notice as well that there doesn't seem to be any scaling, so as soon as it gets to 25% health or below, the enemy or the DPS test dummy will be taking 300% of this 4.3k. So they'll be taking a considerable amount of magic damage, and it is a very cheap skill as well. So we use this in place of Force Pulse when we're doing our weaves under 25%. We have Inner Light here for extra maximum Magicka. We have 5% here built into the skill, and also Magicka Controller. Here we get 2% more just from having that slotted. Soul Harvest, a very cheap and very strong single target ultimate. So for, again, you might be noticing a trend here is that the single target damage is very high. All of these skills will scale up with the Destruction Staff as well. One of the Destruction Staff abilities, I think it's Ancient Knowledge, yep, 8% more damage from single target abilities. All of these attacks will scale up with that, since they are all single target. And if you're wondering as well, again, why I said about having Crippling Grasp on back bar, if it's the last skill you swap over, it will get the bonus from the front bar as well for the 8% damage. At least that's what I've been told. Okay, so on the back bar, Twisting Path, this is a very strong AoE. Nightblades really only have 3 AoEs, and one of them is the ultimate. So you want to have this down as much as possible. Blockade of Storms, this skill is great in conjunction with the second staff that I'm using, the Maelstrom staff. Every light or heavy attack that I do deals additional damage, so we want to have that skill up at all times. Plus it also has a chance of giving us off balanced as well, which is quite nice. Siphoning attacks, this skill is essential for us to sustain properly. During a DPS test you only really need to use this twice, but in a raid or in a longer fight you would have to put this up almost every second time, but basically just keep an eye on it. Dampen Magic, this is just a shield. You could use the other morph as well. They're both very powerful. The only time this won't work is if you've got a broken piece of gear. You need to have all 5 pieces of light armor to be able to use this skill. Inner Light again, just for the extra maximum Magicka and also spell crit. And then finally on the back bar, the strongest AoE in the game, Thunderous Rage. So we use this at the start of the fight, and I've mentioned already why I think this is so powerful. Okay, and also if you stack that skill with Blockade of Storms, the off balance chance is very, very high, and you already have off balance from using the Perfected Staff. Okay, so I've been going over champion points quite a lot, and this seems to be the most optimal setup. Not just from what I've been using, but also I've left a note of where I found this build, also the rotation for this build in the video description, so please have a look at that. There's 40 points into Elfborn, 43 points into Elemental Expert, 32 points into Spell Erosion, 40 points into Master at Arms, and then 75 points into Thaumaturge. I'll go over the other CP just now, although it might vary from trial to trial. All of this will be in the description below the video as well. Okay, so you're probably wondering why I've gone back here. So it's the spell erosion here is quite high. We might not need that much. It depends. So you will need to see with your guild master or the raid leader. But we get a considerable amount of damage from criticals during this fight. Just because during some of the highest damage parts of the DPS test, the Elfborn will come into play a lot more. We'll have a considerable amount of elemental damage as well because of the Perfected Staff and also the Blockade of Storms. And then Master Arms, we're getting a very, very high amount of damage from single target damage attacks. So that will be all of the front bar skills. And then Thaumaturge, we have 75 points here so that we can unlock the Exploiter passive. This is going to change quite a lot in the next patch. So I will go over that difference as well later on. Mighty, Piercing and Precise Strikes are all irrelevant to Magicka classes, so that's why we have 75 points into Thaumaturge, and it's quite nice knowing that the AoEs are going to hit for a lot more. For this portion of the video, I'd like to go over a couple aspects. The first one is that you need to keep Elemental Drain up 100% of the time. In a longer fight, you need to keep Siphoning Strikes active as soon as it runs out. And Merciless Resolve can be used every second bow proc. So when the Spectral Bow is been used twice, you need to use Merciless Resolve immediately afterwards. Another thing as well that I didn't mention in the skills section, once you've used your ultimate at the start of the fight, take a potion immediately after, not beforehand, so that you can get the bonus from Catalyst. This gives you 20 ultimate immediately back. I'll go over the first two parts, so the opening section of the DPS Parses. Then I will go over the middle component, which is what you'll be doing most of the time in a trial, and then I'll try and explain the execute. That's probably the bit that I have most issues with myself. So what you start off by doing is Elemental Drain, Siphoning Strikes, Merciless Resolve, then your ultimate. You take a potion and you need to do a light attack between each skill. So that's the first two portions. The next part of the DPS parse is a bit more simple. You need to do roughly 6 skills on the front bar and 2 on the back, except from when you do Siphoning Strikes. In that case you need to do 5 on the front bar and 3 on the back. That should be every second time. The very end portion of the DPS test is a bit more simple as well. So basically you don't focus on your Siphoning Strikes if it runs out. What you need to do is maintain all of your buffs, make sure that you have a bow ready, and at that point you want to have this minor buff. Once the minor buff is available and you have your front bar ultimate, you use your front bar ultimate, and then instead of Force Pulse you can use Impale. This is going to hit for a considerable amount, but the two AoEs that you want to have up at this point are Blockade of Storms and Crippling Grasp. It doesn't really matter so much about this AoE here, Twisting Path, just because for a 3 mil dummy test the DPS is going to be a lot less because you don't need that over that length of time. But for maybe a longer fight where the percentages are a bit higher, it would be better to have all 3 AoEs down. Okay, so please leave a like and subscribe if you want to see more of this kind of content. If you have any suggestions, please leave them in the comments below as well. And thank you very much for watching. I hope you have a nice day.